Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of Becoming a Gibborim. Today, you know what we're doing? Disarming Dragons. Yep. Have you ever wondered how to disarm a dragon? It's something I've spent probably an uncomfortable amount of time thinking about. Some of you, that's never even kind of crossed your mind. But today, you're going to understand why that's vitally important for you to even survive. Actually survive. And yet not even thrive. Not even just survive, but actually thrive. If you want to thrive, you're going to have to learn all about disarming. It's one of the fundamentals to becoming mighty, because people generally don't spend enough time thinking about, how do I disarm this opponent of mine? You know why? Because most of us don't live as much in a society where people just walk around with spears in their hands anymore. Remember I said earlier, back in episode 1 through 15, there's this character we're talking about a lot lately. He's in the Sword of the Covenant, remember? Today, we're going to be jumping all over the place because we're talking about Saul and his spear, David, obviously, but then we're going to talk a lot about Solomon, Daniel, Moses. We're going to bounce all over the place because Nebuchadnezzar, another guy, we got to talk about mighty Gibborim on both sides of the camp today, and one of them we're going to be dealing with is a woman with a familiar spirit, also sometimes commonly referred to as a witch or a medium. So we're going to talk about necromancy. We're going to talk about a little bit of those kinds of understandings of why the world is the way it is. We're also going to talk about how righteous angels, watcher angels, can curse you with madness and lycanthropy, basically make you into a dog man kind of. So there's a lot going on in the scripture that doesn't get as much press coverage. But today, full court press, son. Game on. I'm all fired up. If you haven't seen our Refuge Railroad video, I strongly encourage you to take some time to watch that and or consider sharing that one specifically with those that you feel pressed and led to do. There's been some tumultuous, wondrous activities that have happened because of that, and I can't wait to be able to start talking to you guys a little bit more about it. But it had a little bit of an update also just about some of the wonderful adventures we've been on, but really the strategic battle plan for what it is we're actually trying to do right now. So I hope you're ready with me. Let's dive in, shall we? Now, if you guys remember our story, we've been dropped right into David versus Goliath early on, right? Shepherd boy. Now he's back in the wilderness, and he's been on the run from Saul. King Saul has spent every single day of his entire life since David fled from him, finding and plotting and thinking of ways to murder David. Saul, in every aspect of our story, is always seen with a spear every single time. David, he's seen with all kinds of other armaments and tools. Sometimes David even girds on his sword, but oftentimes David's pretty much wearing wool and linen out in the forests and the mountains and running about the rocks. Other times he's sneaking into camp and causing the slumber of the living Elohim to fall upon everybody. There's some cool things happening. Meanwhile, David is also writing the Psalms. If you guys didn't know it, the Psalms are one of those places that are smack dab in the center of your face meat of your Sword of the Covenant, so that you'd get your face all kinds of in them on the regs. You need to eat the Psalms constantly. And you know what that means? You're eating the wilderness bread. You're eating the literal words that came down to David at a time in his life when he was so on the precipice of doubt and despair. He was standing on those places of total, unbelievable, soul-crushing fearfulness, agony, doubt, lack. He was experiencing life in a very authentic way. He was experiencing that kind of trial time in your life that most of us actually, it builds our greatest testimonies through. It's not really the pleasant pastures. You know what I'm saying? David spent a lot of time in the palaces, right? Later on in his life, he was king for decades. His time in the wilderness produced so much fruit that still is out there as like a reliable, dependent way for you to come to understand prophecy, truth, revelation, messianic fulfillments, deliverance, salvation, healing, mercy, kindness to enemies, vengeance, the great avenger. Like, there's so much going on in the Psalms, and that stuff came out of here. And now you're going to see why, because there's some crazy stuff happening in the middle of this wilderness time. David is literally living in Ziklag, which is an enemy occupied territory. He's got a family, many families now. Hundreds of men and their families are living with David in strongholds of the Philistines that were given to him because Yahweh stored up the wealth of the wicked for the righteous. And David's now walking in that. It's really getting tumultuous out there. So I'm going to jump in right away because I'm not going to finish in any reasonable time unless I do. Now, check this out. We are reading Psalm 28. Ooh. Also, this is an NASB version. I could talk translations all day long. I'm not going to. They're out there. There's different translations. I like lots of them. I like to use them and compare them and contrast them and use my brain to learn new information. This is another translation I like a lot. And you know why? It's a study book for me because it's got all kinds of other stuff in here that's fantastically helpful for illustrating and understanding what's going on. This is the Sefer. It's translated by a gentleman named Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. The methodology that he used for some of the transliteration of the Hebrew names, he replaced English sounds for Hebrew sounds so that when you read the names in this version, it's like you're kind of saying it in Hebrew, but it makes it really chunky and awkward if you've never heard a name in Hebrew before. It's been a lot difficult. I have no idea. I'm trying to learn a lot, and this is one of those areas that I'm soft in. So I pray you'd bear with me on some of my pronunciation at times when I read from this version. When I read from this version, I still hope you bear with me. I'm learning my swords. That being said, I'm going to read from the Sefer at times in here because he does a better job at getting to some of the nitty-gritty details that I definitely need you guys to understand. So, check it out. We're going to jump in to, now, 1 Samuel 28. Because King Saul, if you didn't know it, is desperate. King Saul is so desperate that he's about to go consult women with familiar spirits and engage in necromancy in order to have a communication with the dead. Terrible decision. Absolutely terrible decision. And you're going to see why for a lot of kings. And why for modern presidents, modern kings, how they do the same thing and have been doing the same thing since as long as you've ever even kind of known America as a land. If you haven't known it, America is the land of the plumed serpent. That's what America means. Go look up Timothy Alberino's video if you haven't recently. The land of the plumed serpent. It goes into way greater detail on that. But America, our founding fathers, like from the beginning, have been consulting mediums. A lot of them. George Washington, very famous, went and had a medium come and give him a message, channeled out to him as the son of the revolution. He was going to bear forth at battle at Valley Forge. All this prophecy, quote unquote, lots of total witchcraft and sorcery and divination stuff. Abraham Lincoln and his wife specifically, super involved in an inordinate amount of channeling mediums. Spiritism was on the rise at the time. So there's been lots of that kind of stuff going on. Anyways, I could go into a lot of stories about how often kings and founders and nations have utilized sorcerers, diviners, astrologers, mediums, people that talk to the other side, right? People that are engaging in what I would say is at a root of it, Sumerian magic, Babylonian magic. You're getting back to the roots of where the Watchers came down and descended around Mount Hermon. This is Genesis 6, where these angels, they shape-shifted themselves, they augmented themselves, and they came down and they taught men secrets of heaven, right? These are kinds of ways of hacking the system because you're no longer in it. You're not in the flow of the righteous kingdom anymore. They lost that power source, so they created a secondary force, like the force of iniquity, sin and transgression, and it breeds and can cultivate to iniquity. And they're tapping into that stream and that current. And so when people are engaged in these kinds of activities, they're tapping in through that strength, that stream, into another kingdom's fuel source. When you do that, you can get access to information and understandings that's not natural, supernatural. It's miraculous if you didn't know it was magical. You understand what I'm saying? Miracles versus magic comes down to the root source of origin. And it's really important you learn how to discern between the two, because ultimately this is the capital D disarmament tool for dragons. You got to learn how to discern between good and evil, righteous and unrighteous. And we're going to learn how they do that. King Saul, let's jump in, shall we? This is 1 Samuel 28. All right. Now it came to be in those days, the Philistines gathered their camps, and I'm just going to start over. Now it came to be about in those days that the Philistines gathered their armed camps for war to fight against Israel. And Achish said to David, "Know assuredly that you will go out with me in the camp, you and your men." David said to Achish, "Very well, you shall know what your servant can do." So Achish said to David, "Very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life." Now Samuel, okay, pause real quick. Over this last summer, I was in Colorado working on a farm, and I was basically getting a job driving in very nice cars, very affluent or influential people around, executive chauffeuring, right? When some of my deepest aspirations at that time that I was praying for was favor with kings and with men, favor with Elohim and with men. It's a really interesting thing. And at the time, I was kind of hoping and praying that I might become a bodyguard for a king. I thought about this because I ended up driving people around like that for a while. And I started gaining favor of some of them. And it was interesting because I was faced with the decision on the very last day of being there. They did not overtly offer me anything for quite a few months. But then some of these individuals I was driving around, like governors' families, people that were politicians of prestige in Washington, D.C., there's really wealthy business people, a lot of that kind of clientele. But then occasionally you're just driving around people that are normal, who just got a job and needed to get a ride somewhere else, right? And they're being interviewed. All kinds of levels and in between. But during that time, I was thinking I may need a job to be a bodyguard to a person that needed a really good bodyguard. And I was hoping that I could have kind of an audience with them. And all that time, I got to share my testimony with an enormous amount of those people. And it ended up being these times of kind of trapped testimony talk where people are in the car with you and they can't get out. That's a super awesome opportunity for you to jump all over a chance to try to win a soul for the kingdom. Do you know what I mean? Seize it. Don't just plug out. Seize an opportunity to have some captured car time with somebody. I finally tried to do that quite a bit. And that was costlier because people generally don't want to hear the good news all the time or anytime, sometimes. But because of that, I was praying for all these opportunities to be a bodyguard for life. Now let's just think about it. This king of Gath wants David to be his bodyguard. Why? David has the anointing on him. David is basically invincible. Seriously. He's indestructible at this point of his life. If King Saul with all his armies and all of his power could not destroy David, and neither could his own champions. Remember, the king of Gath had seen his greatest champion. I don't know if he specifically was there, but we can assume he knows that David slaughtered their greatest champion in the history of Gath, right? Don't worry, he's got other brothers which are mighty, and they're going to end up getting slaughtered by David and his mighty men later on. King of Gath doesn't know that. King of Gath sees David as perfect bodyguard. You know what? David was anointed to be the king of all of Israel, including the land where this guy's now standing and sleeping. Probably not the guy to be your bodyguard, right? That being said, it's a really interesting thing that that's the position that he had in mind for David. David on the same day has a totally different mindset. And you're going to see what the king of Israel also has in store. The father, on the very day Chelsea and I were leaving to go down to this farm in Florida, where it ended up being one of the most transformational places of our lives, of our marriage, of our ministry. It created so much fruit in our lives that was kingdom fruit. And I feel like the day I left, I was tempted with the other option, where someone did invite me to do that and be their bodyguard and their family's bodyguard and like take us into that fold, right? The very day I was supposed to drive out of the state and go down to Florida, I got offered that. And I had to turn it down because I knew the Father was calling me somewhere that was nothing like the palaces of princes. It was nothing like that. He was calling me to be a migrant worker in a greenhouse mini tunnel instead. That's what he called me to do. And I had to be obedient to that and trust that he could bring about opportunities to connect or build anything in his perfect timing. Because if you read about later, I'm getting so excited. If you read about in Daniel chapter 5, and Daniel 2, when Daniel is talking, I'm getting so ahead of myself. I got to stay on task, okay? Daniel basically also reiterates the fact that it is in Yahweh and Yahweh's power alone to completely build up and raise up people in a day or to cast them down. Kings, princes, or commoners, right? He can do it with anybody, anywhere, anytime. And he has a perfect way of doing that that does not involve consulting mediums and murdering your best friend's sons. Like, it's completely different kingdoms, okay? King Saul is tapping into the other kingdom. He's tapping into the kingdom of the dragon here. And that's going to be terribly destructive. If you want to tap into the kingdom of dragon, you can sometimes be raised up in a day. But it's not out of a good foundation. So, now Samuel was dead, and all of Israel had lamented him, and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had removed from the land those who were mediums and spiritists. People with familiar spirits is a better translation. So the Philistines gathered together and came and camped in Shunem. And Saul gathered all of Israel together, and they camped in Gilboa. When Saul saw the camp of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. When Saul inquired of Yahweh, Yahweh did not answer him, either by dreams, or by Urim, or by prophets. Then Saul said to his servants, "Seek for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her." And his servant said to him, "Behold, there is a woman who is a medium at Endor." Then Saul disguised himself by putting on other clothes, and went, he and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, "Conjure up for me, please, and bring up for whom I shall name to you." Hold on. If you didn't know it, there's entire groups of people who disguise themselves at night and go and meet with familiar spirit-bearing other people. They're called secret societies. What? Yep, they run much of the world. That's true. But the truth of who actually runs much of the systems of man, remember earlier I talked about agents of evil versus architects of evil, spiritual side, physical side. Mediums, the world is at the core, at the deepest core of darkness of who actually pulls the strings on what happens and where. It's really magicians, sorcerers, diviners, astrologers. It's those kinds of people, really, at the end of the day, who run a massive influence campaign from the kingdom of darkness. They're his propagandists. Do you understand what that is? That's someone who engineers consent. That's what propaganda is designed. It's structuring a way to engineer your consent for something you wouldn't naturally maybe have a proclivity to agree with. That's happening all the time. There's a spiritual side of it that teaches those people bad, wicked ways of doing that. And then there's a physical side that gives wisdom and counsel from the kingdom of darkness straight to the mouth of the people of influence, so that that system is disseminated out to the masses, okay? That's how our world really works. I'm saying a short synopsis paragraph of like years of research. And some of you have done that and you're like, yes, I've been telling my family this my whole life. Others of you are like, I don't even know. What? What are you saying? Nabisco Foods is run by people that are dragon worshippers and consult dragons and offer children for sacrifice to try to speak to dragons? Yes, that kind of stuff, folks. Dig into it. Disney, I like to talk about them a lot because they're people that captured your imagination and stole truth from you since you were born. They've propagandized so many things. Here's one. Chelsea just realized yesterday we were talking about chicken feed, because now a lot of our life talks about chicken feed. And we were thinking about what are some of the actual things that chickens really need to eat. And you know what one of them was not? Corn. Corn is not like great for chickens. They don't do well with corn. And she said, why do we even think chickens like corn? And she goes, oh, I remember when I was little, I saw a movie, Cinderella. Oh no, maybe Cinderella. I don't know. One of these just horrible atrocities where a child is shattered and traumatized by the loss of a righteous, strong mother figure, devastated orphan, horrible tragedies and destruction and despair and unbelievable amounts of violence and death and weird, creepy uncles and all that stuff start taking place. And then she's suddenly feeding chickens corn. She said she remembered that part where she's like going out with her apron full of corn and feeding the chickens. That might be in a different Disney movie. I may have got that reference wrong. But either way, she said that was just like immediately in her head. She's like, oh, it's because we always see people feeding corn to chickens. And I immediately realized that's a good propaganda tool. That's corn companies. That's big ag. That's big agriculture selling you an idea from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s about why corn is good for chickens, so you should feed chicken corn. It's just so they could sell more corn. Do you understand? But it's actually terrible for the chicken, which we also eat their eggs and meat. So it's probably horrible for us too, right? You see that? That's a system of evil that's just orchestrated. That's like a tiny little window of it. Anyways, corn and chickens. That's how I taught that point. You get it. Anyways, Saul is now with a woman with a familiar spirit. He put on a disguise to conceal who he was, because you know what? Saul is doing actually something that publicly he said to the whole world, hey, guess what? Sorcerers and mediums, get out of here. You're not welcome anymore. But you know what? When push came to shove, what the heck is Saul doing in a witch's tent? What's he doing there? He has doubt that El Shaddai can answer him anymore. So instead, he quits. He quits and he goes right over to the kingdom of darkness. He crosses the line and compromises. Remember, this is how you lose to the dragon. Compromise. That's it. That's it. He disguised himself. He changed his appearance. Yahweh had made him king of Israel, but instead he dressed like a fool. Really, people put on all these outfits and they go and dress like fools and go inside windowless rooms and do all kinds of engaging in necromancy and sorcery and divination and all kinds of strange things, abominable things. They do that because they know what they're doing is evil. You do it in darkness. You do it under the cloak of darkness because you're operating under the kingdom of darkness. It's a real thing. Darkness is also an entity, not just a thing that happens when the sun goes down. That's a much longer story. But then Saul, but the woman said to him, behold, you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off those who are mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you then laying a snare for my life to bring about my death? Saul vowed to her by Yahweh, saying, as Yahweh lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. Then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? And he said, bring up Samuel for me. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. And the king said to her, do not be afraid, but what do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a divine being, an Elohim, coming up from out of the earth. And he said to her, what is his form? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is wrapped with a robe, mantle. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and did homage. Pause. If you didn't know what just happened, this is necromancy. Okay? This is conjuring the dead. Yep, that's a thing that can happen. For real. This isn't fairyland. You guys got to stop thinking the Bible's anything but a history book, too, at the end of the day. It's a living history book. But this is real life. This is telling you the way the world actually works. The rest of the world is lying to you. This is real. That system out there where they say it's not is lying. But this woman has had something happen to her which is contrary to the norm, because most people with their familiar spirits are under a deceitful spirits. They are talking and engaging often with spirits that are shape-shifting themselves to look and act or become that which the individual wishes to see or desire in order to continue the ruse, to carry on their course, to maintain the hooks that have been firmly set within them so that others then might be ensnared and their little tiny spiritual kingdom can grow. They're seeking to usurp, grow, advance, climb the upside down pyramid of destruction. That's how they climb Mount Olympus, right? There are these other Elohim battling it out to try to have their own space and kingdom and fuel source. Mankind is like the Middle Earth where they try to tap in through that. This woman has summoned up by her conjuring what she normally would conjure up would be her familiar spirit, her spirit that is with her that gives her counsel. Instead, Samuel comes up. And let me tell you right now, the Bible says it's Samuel. He's going to prophesy truth. I'm pretty certain it's actually Samuel because Samuel was down in Abraham's bosom, waiting eagerly for the day. Or Sheol, a hollow cavity within the earth where souls of mankind actually go, or spirits actually go, and they wait. This is Samuel coming up to preach. The woman is terrified because normally it's not Samuel. Normally it's her familiar spirit. Normally it's her spirit that she uses on a regular basis. And instead now it's Samuel. And that's freaking terrifying because Samuel was the prophet who also executed an enormous amount of righteous judgment and fury and wrath. And that's terrifying because she's in the other side, right? And we're going to jump back in here. Then Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" And Saul answered, "I am greatly distressed, for the Philistines are waging war against me, and Elohim has departed from me and no longer answers me, either through the prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have called you that you may make known to me what I should do." And Samuel said, "Why then do you ask me, since Yahweh has departed from you and has become your adversary? Yahweh has done according as he spoke through me, for Yahweh has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. As you did not obey Yahweh and did not execute his first wrath on Amalek, so Yahweh has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, Yahweh will also give over Israel along with you into the hands of the Philistines. Therefore tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Indeed, Yahweh will give over the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines." Then Saul immediately fell full length upon the ground and was very afraid because of the words of Samuel, and all his strength was no longer in him, for he'd eaten no food all day and all night. The woman came to Saul and saw that he was terrified and said, "Behold, your maidservant has obeyed you, and I have taken my life in your hand and have listened to your words, which you spoke to me. So now also, please listen to the voice of your maidservant, and let me set a piece of bread before you, so that you may eat and have strength when you go on your way." But he refused and said, "I will not eat." However, his servants together with the woman urged him, and he listened to them. So he arose from the ground and sat on the bed. Then the woman had a fattened calf in the house, and she quickly slaughtered it and took flour, kneaded it, and baked unleavened bread from it. She brought it before Saul and his servants, and they ate. Then they arose and went away that night. Oh my gosh. Saul literally just sat down, rose up from his grieving. He wasn't repenting, recognize. Samuel rebuked him and said, "You're going to die, and that Yahweh himself is now your accuser." Woof, terrifying. Saul falls on his face, and instead of repenting, he gets up, and he is persuaded by a witch, a woman with a familiar spirit, and his advisors who helped him find her, to eat the bread of wickedness and lie down in the bed of a woman with a familiar spirit. This is literally what Proverbs says not to do. And he means it, because Proverbs, if you didn't know it, Solomon really came to learn a lot of bad secrets too. He divined secrets of heaven from the other side too. He turned wholeheartedly evil for a huge portion of his life. And David instructed Saul when he was young. David instructed Solomon when he was very young in order to try to guard him and to give him words of wisdom that he might live by. And in Proverbs, I try to read the Proverbs every day. They're basically given to you in month increments. I think that's because if you desire wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, you should read the Proverbs every single day. The Proverbs have lessons to teach you wisdom that you will never learn in school. You will never learn in the systems of man. They are completely backwards. They make no sense to this system. But you know which one does? This one right here, where it said unto them, okay, this is Proverbs chapter 4, is David's instructions to Solomon that Solomon captures, or someone wrote down. But Solomon is basically relaying, these are the words that my father, David, lived by. Saul doesn't have children's sons' words to live by, because Saul's going to die the next day because he went and did the things that are absolutely an abomination to the living Elohim. And here's why. Now listen, hear my son, and accept my saying, and the years of your life will be many. I have directed you in the ways of wisdom. I have led you in upright paths. When you walk, your steps will not be impeded, and if you run, you will not stumble. Take hold of instruction. Do not let her go, for she is your life. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not proceed in the way of evil men. Avoid it. Do not pass by it. Turn away from it and pass on, for they cannot sleep unless they do evil, and they are robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. If you don't know about occult ceremonies, you are made to drink from the cup of violence. You are made to eat the bread of wickedness. Do you understand what two things those aren't? That's not the blood and the body of Messiah. There's a word for it that's better to be used for PG-13 audiences, a dirtied version of it. This is the corrupted thing. This is the detestable thing they do in darkness, okay? They drink and eat abominable things in order to defile themselves and make them into another image, to transform themselves out of who they are into what their God is, okay? Just because somebody has capital G, capital O, capital D in their oaths and in their swearing in ceremonies does not mean they're talking about the same God. That is an Elohim that they're worshiping. And Proverbs is full of teaching you how to be set apart from that, how to be set apart and distinct from it, how to be someone that is not in alignment with that kingdom in any capacity. David is sitting here telling Solomon, do not do these things. Do not be a part of this kingdom. Instead, he says, my son, give attention to my ears. He said, but the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn that shines brighter and brighter until the full day. But the way of the wicked is like darkness. They do not know what they stumble over. So my son, give attention to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them depart from your sight. Keep them in the midst of your heart, for they are life to those who find them and health to all their body. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put devious speech far from you. Let your eyes look directly ahead and fix your gaze straight in front of you. Watch the path of your feet, and all your ways will be established. Do not turn to the right nor to the left, but turn your foot from evil. That is instructing your son in a way of righteousness and living. People that consult liars, thieves, diviners, astrologers, people that counsel and receive wisdom and counsel from that have crooked foundations. You have cracked the foundations of what your life is, and you have allowed iniquity to flow from the base of that crack and plant a tree in there that will build forth a fruit that will bear fruit in your life. Do you know what the fruit of consulting mediums? Do you know what the fruit of consulting and engaging in necromancy is? Madness. You get cursed with sleeplessness and madness. And it says it right here in Scripture. People just don't read the Scripture like it's actually meaning what it's saying. It's saying that they can't rest. They get restlessness. That's their curse. If you go and engage in this type of activity, the curse that you get is restlessness. Maybe not the days that you engage in it, but later. The enemy will always come and have his revenge. He will always come because that root of iniquity, that tree of iniquity that's in your heart, now gets to bear fruit in his kingdom. And he gets to harvest that anytime he wants. You're now a part of his kingdom's vineyard. Okay? You have broken yourself off, and you have been cast into another fire. And he can sift you anytime he wants, because he's got these doors in your life that are so open, he can walk in and plunder your goods anytime he so chooses, because it's his house. That's what happens when you align yourself with these kings and these other gods and these other Elohim. This is what happens to Saul. Saul aligns himself to that kingdom. Saul eats the bread. He lays down in her bed. He makes a vow with her. Do you understand? These are all the rituals that people engage in all the time. They do this with religious fervor. believing they are doing a just thing, if they balance their deeds, if they balance them in light and in darkness, they are walking in this. They are building world systems on this. This is how they make their kingdoms grow. Repentance, deliverance, renouncing it, turning from that which you once were in agreement with and walking on a completely different path is how you disarm those powers. You renounce what you once said, okay? And we're going to see an example of that in Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is like Saul in some ways. Nebuchadnezzar becomes far mightier in many other ways. Completely different kingdom level. Daniel's time, okay? This is when the people are in captivity. If you didn't know it, there's lots of times where 2 tribes, 1 tribe, multiple tribes get plundered and cut into pieces and scattered all over. There's a lot that happens in the history of the scriptures that you haven't read and understood. I hadn't, because I'd never just read it like it was something historical and desperately important. All of it, even the genealogies being important. But once you study the scripture, you realize there's this chronological history that's happening that our modern translations sometimes just jack up by how they arrange some of the books because it's confusing. But if you can read it a little more chronologically at times, like just reading and understanding what was happening from the time around Daniel for a couple hundred years, it's so helpful. Nebuchadnezzar is a king that was part of executing judgment against the land, and he took captive the tribes and brought them to Babylon. Daniel is one of these men who is a young man who is risen up in wisdom and understanding because he follows after the way of righteousness. He walks in truth. He walks under the spirit of truth. He follows the instructions of his fathers, his righteous fathers. And because that, Daniel is about to have favor with the king, okay, and do something that his mediums could not do. All right? It's a showdown time. You know I love the showdown stories because that's where you get the Gibborimness. All right? Now, this is Daniel chapter 2, okay? And in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his ruach was troubled, and his sleep broke from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, and the astrologers, and the sorcerers, and the Kasadaim, for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king, and the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my ruach was troubled to know the dream. Then spoke the Kasadaim to the king in Aramath, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. Then the king answered and said to the Kasadaim, The thing is gone from me. If you will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. But if ye show me the dream and the interpretation thereof, you shall receive of me gifts and great honor and rewards. Therefore, show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. They answered again and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it. The king answered and said, I know of certainty that you would gain time, because you see the thing is gone from me. But if you do not make known unto me what the dream is, there is but one decree for you have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me till the times are changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me the interpretation thereof. The Kasadaim answered before the king and said, There is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore there is no king, lord, nor ruler that asks such things of any magician or astrologer or Kasadai. And it is a rare thing that the king requires, and there is none other that can show it before the king except the Elohim, whose dwelling is not with flesh. They just recognized, even the magicians and the astrologers just recognized, they admitted where their source of knowledge is, where their fountainheads are, where the spring of life is for them. The springs that they're getting their life from, Elohim. This is not the righteous Elohim. Potentially, this is exactly the Elohim we're always talking about when it comes to the kingdom of darkness side, right? These people have an understanding. That's what they're tapped into. they also recognize that they have limits because of that. And one of those limits is complete knowledge, omniscience. Omniscience is not available to the other Elohim. Because of that, there's limitations to their power. And this is one of those times where they admit that. And that's really important. But you're about to meet the one who is not limited in knowledge, who's not limited in power. And you're about to meet his ambassador here on the earth. At the time, Daniel. Gibborim number 1. Checkmate, bro. Check this out. You ready? And the decree for this cause, the king was angry and furious and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babel. And the decree went forth that wise men should be slain. And they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. Meaning they just activated a special kill team network to murder Daniel and his friends. Okay? Sound familiar? Go check out special kill teams. Then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babel. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is the decree so hasty from the king?" Then Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. Then Daniel went in and desired that the king would give him time, and that he would show the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they would desire mercies of the Elohim of heaven concerning the secret, that Daniel and his servants and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babel. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the Elohim of heaven. And Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of Elohim forever and forever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. He reveals the deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O Elohim of my fathers, who has given me wisdom and might, and has made known unto me now what we have desired of you. For you have now made known unto us the king's matter." Do you understand how powerful? Oh man, sorry, the sun apparently is catching up to me. Do you understand how mighty and powerful it is that Daniel, I don't know how to do this. Daniel has been given a download from the literal wellspring of life. Oh, whatever. Daniel got given a wellspring of life when it came to information that he desperately needed. He didn't know. He understood and appealed to the King of Kings, El Elyon, El Gibor. He appealed to the Prince of Glory for wisdom. That's the wellspring of all life. He's where real life flows from. If you need wisdom, if you need understanding, if you need hope, if you need courage, if you need strength, if you need a specific word of knowledge to your situation alone, if you need a specific word of knowledge for the world situation, meaning for every man, woman, and child on the earth to hear a good word, you may be called upon to bring that message out. Do you ever consider that? You may be the person who has been specifically, strategically placed directly next to the king of the earth, and you don't even know it. You don't even know it, and you could be giving them a piece of wisdom, giving them a piece of encouragement, sharing a word with the weary, offering the naked clothing. Covering someone's shame is how you cover someone who's naked. I'm not talking about their tender bits. I'm talking about the bits of their soul that they hung out in the wind when they suddenly shared something with you they've never shared with anybody else in their life. That's covering someone with mercy. When you love on them, when you give them a good word, when you comfort them with covenants, with life, when you breathe life on them, when you give grace, mercy, power for them to go forward to accomplish the mission they have been given on this earth. When you empower people, when you give them joy, when you inspire them to see good things in the world. You have been custom catered and carved out of the stones of the earth to be alive for such a time as this, today, right now, not tomorrow, not even a little bit in the future, but this time, right now. Seize it with everything in you. Daniel seized upon the words of life from the foundations of the earth that were laid for him for such a time as this. He seized upon it right here. But you know what he did when doing this? He does not become puffed up with pride. Instead, he gives glory to the righteous one who he should give glory to. Because Daniel had every right to be fearful, just like many other men who have just been told that they are all going to be executed. But Daniel appeals to the Prince of Peace to be his hedge of protection. And Daniel has favor with the bodyguard of the king. Daniel has favor with a man whose name is Arioch, the captain of the guard. This was the king's chosen bodyguard. He was there to murder Daniel. But Daniel, the man of righteousness, had favor with that man long enough to hold his sword and to encourage him to give him an opportunity. He got time from the captain of the guard. He got time from the strategically placed bodyguard of the king. Do you see that? This man was the bodyguard of the king. Daniel is about to give a word that will save the lives of all of his friends, his family. This is another story like Esther, folks. If you're not hearing Esther the whole time you hear this, you need to read Esther and you need to read Daniel at the same time. Because you're getting Gibborim versions of a woman of righteousness and a man of righteousness all the time in Scripture to teach you about good things, to teach you how to be mighty. All of Scripture is here to instruct us of these things, and you need to look at it like it actually matters in your life. And then when it suddenly does, it will transform you. It will make you into an image of the one who wrote it, the author who breathed the life into it. The name of the living king can be written upon you and transform you so that when your moment comes, when your testing comes to find out whether or not you will be someone who is righteous or someone who is wicked, like when Saul was pressed against that moment of seeing the Philistines right there in front of him, he turned to his servants for counsel and he sought the path of wickedness and darkness, and it will lead him to his death. Nebuchadnezzar is seeking wisdom. He's looking for wisdom, and he's looking for where he could find it. And he looked and appealed to the gods of this world. He looked and appealed to the gods of men. He looked to the agents of evil. He looked to people that he knew were liars and thieves to answer him truthfully. But he tested them in it. And because of that, when the king gives a testing like this, it gives an opportunity for Daniel, for our mighty Gibborim, to rise up and show who is God above, who is the El Elyon, who is the King of Kings, right? Oh, that was probably unfortunately loud. I apologize a little bit. Now, therefore, man, it's a big book. I love this book, but it's enormous and it's very cumbersome to read, but that's all right. Therefore, Daniel went unto Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babel. He went and said thus unto him, Destroy not the wise men of Babel. Bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Yehudah, that will make known unto the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Baaltazar, Are you able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof? Then Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king has demanded the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers, cannot show unto the king. But there is an Elohim in heaven that reveals secrets, and makes known to the king Nebuchadnezzar's what shall be in the latter days. Your dream and the vision of your head upon your bed are these. As for you, O king, your thoughts came into your mind upon your bed, what should come to pass hereafter. And he that reveals secrets made known to you what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes, that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that you might know the thoughts of your heart. You, Daniel right there, gives proper glory to the righteous king. Do you understand? Daniel used wisdom and tact, and he gave everyone their righteous praise. Does that make sense? He made sure everybody got it before Daniel does something that's impossible. Before David did something that was impossible, he gave glory to the righteous one. Before Saul gave glory to the wicked, he hid himself and lied. Do you understand the difference? Entering in to the kingdom of righteousness or the kingdom of darkness can be separated by the words you say first. Some of the most important things that'll ever happen when you're set up for that divine moment, that super special moment where you must stand either in opposition of evil or to be a participant in evil. You must stand and make choices with your words of agreement. You make vows of where you place your faith and your trust, and then you go and act. And it's out of the flow of iniquity or out of the flow of righteousness that your deeds become mighty. You, O king, saw, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before you, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. You saw till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and broke them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, and the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell you the interpretation thereof before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings. For the Elohim of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, and strength and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heavens, he has given into your hand, and has made you ruler over all of them. You are this head of gold. And after you shall rise another kingdom inferior to you, and a third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things, and as iron that breaks all these shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas you saw the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in front of the strength of the iron, for as much as you saw the iron mixed with miry clay, and as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas you saw iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. In the days of these kings shall the Elohim of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to the other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as you saw that stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great Elohim has made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof for sure. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors to him. And the king answered unto Daniel and said, Of a truth is the Elohim is an Elohim of Elohim, and an Adonai of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing you could reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babel, and the chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babel. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babel. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. That's an ultimate showdown. Daniel was able to convert the mind of the king and the kingdom for the King of glory. In one chapter, he got the king of the earth the majority of that region of the entire known earth, of that space and kingdom land. Nebuchadnezzar's ruling it. And in 1 minute, Daniel usurps the entire kingdom authority of what had been going on there. Physically, all those agents of evil suddenly just got usurped, right? It was in the power of Elohim to raise up Daniel and the righteous seed of Judah that were there at that time, the righteous sons and daughters who were walking in the paths of their father's instructions, the righteous father's instructions. They got raised up, and the people were blessed in Babel to have righteous people ruling over them. There was a blessing that would now flow because the principalities, powers, rulers, and dominions, the spiritual powers behind the astrologers, the sorcerers, the diviners, the magicians, the spiritual principalities above them were usurped with them. Do you understand? There's a spiritual usurping that happens when you make the vow, when you make the agreement, when you come into agreement on this earth with what we bind on this earth and what we loose on this earth, have spiritual ramifications in that realm. When we come into agreement with the promises of his word, when we walk in obedience to his ways, when we proclaim the name of the living God in the earth, when we walk along with him and we demonstrate to the world that we are not like it, we transform ourselves into his image bearers on this earth, and his spirit can flow through us and empower us to be like him on this earth, to allow the manifestation of his kingdom in our lives and in the lives of the people around us. But when we walk in the path of the wicked, when we go down into darkness, we allow those spiritual influences to seduce us, set snares into us, to hook onto us and never let us go. When you set a snare for a human being, when you set a human being snare, okay, do you know what you do? Do you ever think about how to bait a human? I had to learn how to bait humans. Yes. When you set snares for them, they must be something that they simply must have. Something that they absolutely need to have in their life. You grab a hold, you dangle that out in front of them, and then you compromise their footing as they are all in committed and they need sure-footedness. Because the way you destroy mankind is to take him out at his feet. The way you destroyed the Anakim, Amos 2:9, the way you destroyed the giants was their fruit above and their roots beneath. You drop their feet, you set a snare for their feet, and you make them fall, right, at the worst possible time. That's how the enemy sets snares for us. It's like the image of someone climbing a mountain and is just exhausted and fatigued because they've been working on this thing for a year of their life, preparing, planning, getting the equipment, getting the gear, getting everything ready, getting over their training, getting their body conditioned. And at the last moment, as they're getting towards the summit, as they're approaching the end prize that they've been chasing for all this time in their life, suddenly the person that was there alongside them as their helpmate takes their foot out from under them and makes them fall down the mountain to their death. That's a snare for man. Chasing an idol is how you set a snare for a man. Painting a vision, selling a dream, capturing the imagination is how you set snares for people that hold on to them the rest of their life. The word is living and active. It's a sword that cuts men free from snares. Spiritual and physical snares can be severed by this. That's the omnidirectionality of the living word of God. It cuts in all directions. It's exceptionally precise, cutting through the soul and the spirit. Dividing is a discerner of the thoughts and the intents of the hearts of man. Daniel demonstrated that to the king Nebuchadnezzar when he usurped the spiritual powers and authority over Babel. This is literally Babylon, people. This is like the base level of where all those gods and gods have been ruling out of and through for a long time, right? This is old magic lands. This is the deep darkness lands. And yet Daniel is usurping it in a moment. There are people in your life who need you to be their usurper of those snares that have been in their flesh, to be someone that offers them the peace of joy that is in your soul. I hope you guys will take captive these words that you are seeing here, these words that are being poured out, these words that are alive in this book, because they can transform you, they can change you. Because you know what? Nebuchadnezzar was transformed. He admitted who was the best. He admitted who had won, right? He said, he now knew who was the Reveler of Secrets. Our presidents for the last almost 50 years consulted, they call them presidential spiritual advisors. You can look that up because different presidents have spiritual advisors. And do you know what that means? That's a lot of times they're astrologers, they're magicians, they're sorcerers, that's their diviners, okay? That's their people they consult that have familiar spirits that talk to the Elohim and they get information from them. Gene Dixon, a very famous one for a long time for a lot of reasons, counseled many of our good Christian American presidents, right? Good Catholic presidents. You guys have been lied to in so many ways, it's unbelievable to get started at. They're not who you think they are, our presidents, the figureheads of our nations. They're not what you think they are. You must learn and study it. These people consult witches in order to get information, and they get it because they don't know that there's something better. Do you get what I'm saying? It's not the wickedness in this. I'm not attacking the agents of evil. Gene Dixon is not the embodiment of evil. Any of these people who walk in these paths, they are not the problem. The problem is that the enemy is overwhelmed the world with believing that the greatest power and authority comes through those means, and that when they're in a moment of crisis, they don't know that they can turn to the people of righteous living. They don't know that there's Gibborim in the kingdom of Elohim. They don't know who are the kingdom of Yahweh's people because they have not seen our fruit. Our fruit has been like their kingdom for so long that it's indistinguishable. It looks just like theirs. Our homes, our marriages, our children, our lives, the fruit of our houses, the fruit of our loins, what does it look like? It looks like theirs. Divorce rates, pornography addictions, substance addictions, violence, domestic violence. Like we look like them because we are under the influence of their gods, because we are still caught up in their snares. But when you get set free from them, when you get cut from them, when you go and live in the wilderness where you can't cling to their idols anymore, it changes you. It changes you. It makes you fierce. It makes you wholly committed to the words of this book like never before in your life. And you know what happens? His kingdom starts to flow. And he changes the people in your life to be more like him, and so that you can be an influencer of people in a righteous way. I am so thankful that he did not make me a bodyguard to that man at that time. He didn't call me back to a path of violence. He called me to a path of peace. He called me to lay down my bloody hands and wash them in springs of living water instead. He sent me to Florida where I could prune tomatoes and swim in springs of water and find dinosaur bones with my daughter. That's what he sent me to do instead of traveling around on private jets, meeting with kings. But you know what? In a day, he can change that. In a day, he can drive me into nothingness or everywhere. I'll go wherever he will send me because you know what I believe? He is the revealer of secrets. He is the one who has wisdom and understanding. It's him we should seek it from every single day of our life. And if ever we are called upon to give a word to others who need it, answer and seize boldly on that opportunity. I was going to get into also Nebuchadnezzar and his shapeshiftingness, but I'm a little over an hour now. So I'm going to have to come and circle back to Nebuchadnezzar and his shapeshiftingness and being cursed with man. How about I just carry on for 5 more minutes? Okay, let's just do it. For those of you that stuck with me in here all the way to the end, guess what? We're going to talk about shapeshifting a little bit, just a little bit, because the same Nebuchadnezzar who gives righteous praise is also about to get cursed by the watchers, righteous watcher angels, with madness. Should we go there or should I save it? Hold on. Now, this is so good. I gotta pause it, man. I'm gonna give it to you another time. It's too rich. Somebody's gonna need this later on in their life. That being said, I appreciate you all for coming along with me in this journey. It's been a wild ride. I hope each of you will take, honestly, some of the words that I challenged some of you with today, but to not make idols of the men or the systems that they offer you, but instead to make no unclean image from what he is, to delineate yourself from the ways of the world, to not look like them, to not think that you need to be dependent upon the gods of man to save you, to provide for you, to sustain you. They don't have the words of life in them. They are not the ones who can reveal the secrets of true wisdom. Appeal to the one who needs. If you need to know something, he can give it to you. I pray that you would be bold enough and faithful enough when called upon to give an answer, that you would be studied, well practiced, that you would be ready to give a good answer to people that ask you a good question. The world is primed like never before to receive instruction, to receive life. Let us not be givers of more death, but let us instead pour on them the words of life. So put them in you today. Go to the spring head of waters. Go to the fountain of waters and drink from his cup. You will not be thirsty any longer. Remember, I love you. I care about you. Be strategically dangerous out there every single day of your life, because the days are evil, but you were born for such a time as this. Go be valiant and go be mighty, even unto death.